93 got that beat.
What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence here with another episode of Watch God Work. In every episode, we get the distinct pleasure and honor to speak to a brother or sister that's doing exceptional work in every field of human endeavor. And they share their God stories, the ways in which God has been at work in their life and the ways in which God has been at work through their work. And today I am particularly excited. I'm always excited, but this hits my heart because we are speaking to my sister, your sister, our sister, Miss Charisse Conanan Johnson. Hello, Charisse.
Hello, and amen, my brother. It's great to be here.
I think in these times when someone talks about wealth, I think people's ears perk up. It seems to be the conversation du jour in many ways. Not that wealth was never important, but I do think that people have been experiencing so much instability. They've had to rethink even how they've structured their financial lives. That in order for them to truly live and to be able to do the things that they feel called to do, be places and spend the time with the people they feel called to, that they need to rethink this whole thing. But there's something about when we look at wealth in a more broader sense. And I think that that's been so much of the work that you have been doing for the better part of your career that has been beyond the balance sheet. It's been beyond the income statement. It's been beyond the quarterly. It's been something that allows people to both be intentional about their financial lives and be intentional about that, but also to look inward and say that you could have all the prosperity in the world financially, but you will not have the peace and the personal power that I think all of us desire and want. And I'm only scratching the surface about your work and your story. You're currently a managing director at Next Street, and you are advising major institutions from Obama Foundation and the like around their financial strategies and what they're doing around the area of wealth. But even beyond that vertical, but for a better part of your career, you've been able to look at finances and wealth and assets and drive value. But your heart's been for the people. And so I can't actually do your story justice. I'm just scratching the surface. But I'm so excited just to introduce you. So Charisse, who is Miss Charisse Conanan Johnson?
Well, first of all, it is a pleasure to be here with you, Lawrence. And you just ushered me in a mighty way. Mm-hmm. I can surely pick up from where you left off in letting you know who I am. Mm. And first, I want to claim that I am a wealthy girl.
Yes.
I'm claiming it, Lawrence. And I'm the original wealthy girl. As you know, I just published a book earlier this year called A Wealthy Girl, 7 Steps to Prosperity, Peace, and Personal Power, which gets to your question, what's my story and how am I here confidently claiming that I am a wealthy girl? And it starts, I'm from Strong Island. So if you're familiar with that part of the world,
Freeport, okay.
That's right. Port Knox. Yeah. And so I am the child of a nurse administrator, as well as a teacher of special education. And I am a sister to my older brother, Clayton. And it starts there. That is where I came into the world. And that is who surrounded me with love. And that is who affirmed me as a child of God. I did not learn that when I first came here into this world by myself. And so as I grew up in that town of Freeport, I was always, Lawrence, encouraged to think beyond myself, to think about community, mainly because of who my parents are and what they did and what they felt like their own calling in life was. That took me to Yale University, where I wanted to understand how this major institution has so much of what you mentioned earlier, the tangible wealth, but many of the people situated outside of Yale's doors did not have that same tangible wealth. And as I was there, I also got a sense of wealth beyond just the dollars and cents in relational capital, social capital, and how that opened doors for people. Many people say that about the Ivy Leagues, and I think part of that is true. And so that encouraged me to pursue a path to learn how to invest like the professionals. That took me to JPMorgan. I spent my earlier part of my career learning, growing in the field of asset management and particularly the stock market. I spent my days picking stocks and doing research. And ultimately, though, I realized, you know what? I had a larger calling on my life, and that season was wonderful. And I would not trade it for the world. It got me the credential also of the CFA, or Chartered Financial Analyst designation. And I decided, you know what? I want to take that talent and try to expose others to some of the tips and philosophies around generating wealth. And so that took me to Chicago, where I am now, and attended business school and ultimately started a financial technology company out of business school, because instead of being a W-2 earner, I wanted to be an owner. I wanted to be that kind of asset generator, which helps to obtain wealth. And so I spent 5 years running and growing a business out of nothing. We ended up closing that business for many reasons. What actually led me to what I do now, which is talking about that experience and my previous experience, but also in my day job at Next Street, where, as you mentioned, we work at the intersection of trying to create inclusive entrepreneurial economies such that Black and Brown entrepreneurs and small businesses have the capital, get the customers, and make sure they get quality services so that they can scale and grow. And our clients are some of those major institutions that you mentioned.
If anybody's clearly, for people listening, you can feel the electricity. With Charisse, I mean, the first time we had a conversation before this, I felt the electricity in the Discord, in the conversation. And I just said, there's a sense of knowing, or a sense of also there's winds and gusts behind me. And so I'm thinking about Grandma Pearl. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about just your family and Grandma Shine and the history from what you come from. What is it about the way that your grandparents and your parents presented their stories and presented faith that made it attractive to you?
I love that question, because you hit the nail on the head. Growing up, watching, absorbing, and wanting to emulate ultimately this joy that my family had. They might not have had a ton of money, and we didn't. My grandparents were poor. My grandma Shine migrated here from the South to the North with literally a few dollars. My grandma Pearl followed her sister to the South, from the South to the North, with not much but a suitcase. And so they were pioneers because of their faith, and I was attracted to their stories of how they then built whole families, and not just their nuclear families, but extended family and community around them to support how they would go about this new life in this new city with new opportunity away from Jim Crow South. And so I take that they didn't want to have the strain, or shall I say the boots, stomping on their necks and saying, I can't breathe. And this is back in the day in the 1950s, during that great migration of 6 other million Blacks from South to North. And so growing up, hearing their stories, hearing about their joy, seeing their joy manifested every time, that let me know that I'm worthy, having that family still pray for me and wanting me to have more than they had by way of education, by way of encouraging me. You got to pray for yourself, by making sure that I took advantage of every opportunity and be good at the unique talents that God has given me. And they had unique talents too, whether it was bringing people together, whether it was cooking, whether it was talking about current events, whether it was helping people at the homeless shelters, whether it was making sure that they served, my grandma Shine served at an usher, or as she would say, an ursher at church, right? Like, grandmother is 93 years old, and she says, Ursher. That's what I was exposed to. That kind of wanting that peace and personal power transcended to my parents, who then taught me some of those core values around honoring your history, making sure that you can live a fulfilled life, that you're not valued by how much money you have, but what God has uniquely purposed you to do. And that's what I have wanted to do with my life. And that's why I do have this expanded definition of wealth.
This is beautiful. And in some sense, it's interesting, right? Because they came, from the South to the North. But one thing that you even talk to, even in your book, is a little bit about even just the reality of systematic oppression. And even in the North, you had redlining and you had all these things. And so it's not like they fully escaped, but they fully escaped perhaps the most overt, forms of racism. Right. But even for you, you've always lived at an intersection. And I can imagine even your story of your family's at an intersection of both, you have African American of the diaspora, but also Filipino. And so how did those two come together, and how did it affect how you saw faith? How did those two things impact just how you saw it?
Well, you going in now, right? Like, I love that. I mean, I think we're all made up of the different, lineage and the culture of that lineage. And that for me was important. I think as people of color, whether that's Black American, which I am, whether that's Filipino, which I also am, it's not, one or the other. It's an embracing of all of that. And when you embrace that, I think as those people and people of color here, particularly in America, there has to be an understanding of the history of racism, the history of oppression, and the victory that comes when we have escaped some of the shackles that have tried to hold us down, because we are a victorious people. And I think sometimes people focus so much on the deficit that, and I know this because, yes, racism truly is at the root of so much of what is not right here in this country. And as I hold that, I have to also hold on to the faith that the future is going to be better than the current. Yeah. And so I think my identity and how I choose to claim those pieces of who I am links directly to my faith, because it is that same faith that has propelled me to buck those systemic oppressive systems that have tried to hold my people back.
This is key. I mean, I think when people put immigrant, or if you talk about being a member of the beautiful family of melanation, I call it, of the diaspora, and our extended family around the world, naturally there's an assumption, right, that we probably didn't come from much in terms of financial. Right. Well, I didn't have a kind of golden blanket. My family wasn't necessarily the most financially secure, but we were secure in other ways. Right. When you thought about your career pre-Yale, or even heading into Yale before kind of studying economics, was your pursuit of learning about money and economics and systems curiosity, or was it the tried and true, I didn't come from anything security? Was it curiosity, or was it more security?
I love that. For me, it was about curiosity and wanting to understand what I saw was what this country valued. So why is it that we valued $1 so much? I mean, even when I look, for instance, we just went through an NBA draft. We have a country and a society values, it puts dollar amounts on certain occupations, put amounts on occupation. It really depends on what people are worth. That's intriguing. It was intriguing growing up. It was intriguing because I grew up in Freeport, which is one of the most in all of Long Island, but also I would argue in the East Coast, because Freeport, it was a third Black, a third Latino, and Latino broadly, and then a third white. And in that kind of dynamic, one is forced to grapple with who they are and where that money might come from, where their family origin story is. And I wanted to know why do some people value some things over others, and who is actually defining what this wealth is? And then how do I go get it? And so that for me was, I think, the motivation, the curiosity, and then the wanting to eventually learn a skill set that I could take advantage of for not just me, but the people that look like me.
And it's interesting, right? Even in hearing that, right? The curiosity, right? I want to, and I'm just giving you my own context, right? I wanted to just learn, even though I went into the investment banking early, right? Right after I kind of finished, career, I did my summers, investment banking and the like, and then did consulting ultimately after that. Even after doing that, I would argue that I still wasn't really financially literate.
Yep.
Right. Like my Excel game models is popping and my macros and everything's jumping, right? I think for people who knows this, at the same time, but it actually made me look back and say, well, I was endowed with a lot of things, but one thing that actually wasn't so much passed down, not because of just lack, I learned so much, but it wasn't the financial literacy and answering some of those questions about how do these systems work? How does real money work? How does real assets, how do they appreciate? What's accreted? I didn't know any of those things. And so even when you were saying that there was a shift in college that you said, okay, beyond, there was something that you said, I realized that I wanted to learn wealth beyond the dollars and cents. What was the rub like when you got to Yale? Like, what was the rub where you're like, okay, great, I'm learning economics, but there's got to be more than this. And I can't just stay here, right, and learn about this thing that I'm curious about. There has to be more than this.
Absolutely. That is a telling question, because the rub for me, and as I'm thinking about your question, it truly was two probably defining moments. The first is I had an internship with Inroads, and shout out to Inroads, folks who have come through the program, right? Inroads is all about getting internships for people of color, and particularly BIPOC, in large institutions. They started out doing that in finance, but now they do it in many other sectors, similar to some folks who are familiar with Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, or SEO. And I was just interested in business and kind of like how the world works. But through that internship, and my first one was at Verizon, I remember meeting my manager, who was a white woman who treated me, quite frankly, like trash. And this is someone, I went to Yale, I was coming in all excited, and the power dynamic that came with her authority and her position of wealth, like, wanted me to recognize it's not just about the money, it's about the power. It's about the relational capital. And so when I came back to Yale, I saw similar patterns at Yale, right? And that was meaningful for me. The second thing that happened is I picked up another major, and that major was American Studies. And American Studies is a critique of American history, which is about unveiling the systems and structures rooted in racism, classism, sexism that have caused the oppression, that have caused the cultural outcomes and outputs that you see in the movies, or, in arts and performance, or, how certain, different major events in U.S. history have happened. You're basically critiquing that history and looking at it through the lens of race, gender, and class. And so when I combine that, and then, now I have to add a third one. I was around wealthy, tangibly wealthy Black people too. And I was like, oh, snap. And I just hadn't seen many. One of my fellow Yaleys, he was on he came out from a plane. He was like, yeah, I just got off my private plane. And I was like, what? How did that happen? And so I kind of wanted to understand the systems that almost similar to you, to make money move, and beyond though the bank account, the power of relational capital, and from that internship experience, how that power kind of plays out. And I began my quest to kind of rethink about that wealth equation. And it took some time because where I am now and how I thought about wealth was not where I was at 22. At 22, I was thinking about it much differently and more in the traditional sense, but it's only now really in reflection that I realized that those are the pieces, almost to your question, of that I've kind of been putting that together.
This is the reason I want to hold on this a bit, because I don't want people to miss this piece. I think this is the issue for people. Money in and of itself, right? As a currency, the currency really doesn't have value unless it's exchanged and there's perceived value that you're paying for or exchanging for. But I think for many people, what money affords, or what wealth affords, right? Leveraging all the wealth that God has given them, both those tangible and then intangible assets, is that it gives them power. And you talk about this, the personal power, and that's just keen. I always say this, particularly as a brother. I'm keen enough. I read enough, and I pay attention to the public square. I pay attention to what's happening in the world, and I recognize I can't say everything, or I can't always speak the truth in ways that won't cost me. So it's not so much. There's, in one sense, you want assets and you want wealth because I want to be able to be generous for the kingdom and be able to do things that people won't fund, that people won't do, right? Because I know it's going to help people's lives and it's going to help be a healing force. But there's another part of it saying there's a lot of people, our brothers and sisters around us, many people who are listening, who they are so afraid, or they're like, I really want to do this work, or I really want to say these things. I really want to speak up, but it's going to cost me. So wealth would allow me to be free to step into fully who I am. It's a sense of powerlessness, but I think this is where faith comes in. And so I have to even ask you, because it seems, even as you're talking about this crescendo, going to Yale and then kind of having a little bit more color to this, there still was this sense, I would say, of not being content with the constraints. And so you talk a little bit about your story, even with Strabismus, and even that idea. I think for many people may see that and say, I feel powerless. This is something I could not control. What do I do? Or even for you, that's one piece of it. And I would love you to talk about that. Was that kind of a place where you just said it honed your, let's say, like your faith power and strength to say, you know what, even though this is something I can't control, it's not going to control me. Could you talk a little bit more about that part of your journey?
Absolutely. And for those who are not familiar with the condition of strabismus, it is in a common vernacular lazy eye, where one eye might veer to the left, one and up and out, it might veer inward. So what people don't know, they might see the physical effect of that when you look at someone, but they also don't know that strabismus, what comes with it is you don't have uniform muscle movement and control for both eyes. So for me, I only, for instance, read with one eye. And so there is a brain dislocation from sort of the brain to the eye. And it's a condition that affects millions of folks around the country, but more globally. And I was born with this condition, and I've had surgery to correct this condition. So even as I look at you now, I can see my eyes are straight, but you might not know that I have had this condition. I still have the condition, but it's been corrected from the outward, but inwardly, those same kind of traits still exist. And when I was young, my parents told me, and particularly I think for young girls, getting this affirmation from their men in their life, for me, it was my father, it was my brother. It instilled in me confidence. It told me that I still am worthy, even though I have this, in your vernacular, constraint, in my words, disability. And so having that affirmed, and also telling people to people telling me that loved on me, you can still be anything that you want to do, and you are worthy of that, was so empowering for me. And so even though sometimes my eyes might still wander or drift, I'm reminded that I'm still worthy, and that disease and that condition didn't stop me from all that I was able to do. In fact, it propelled me to perhaps want to be better and kind of sometimes make up for what I had growing up, sometimes perceived as a lack. But through the working, through the confidence boosters, it became an asset. And that's what I mean. Like, it's an intangible asset that I have a very high degree of confidence. And that is because of what started out as a constraint, built in me a muscle, a faith muscle. And that's where the connection is, because it's that faith muscle there. You can envision something that you don't see today. I can envision that I can be my own definition and state what I want for a wealthy life. And so that is the faith in the future of what I don't see today.
I think this is the missing link. This is why I'm so overjoyed about you sharing your story to the world, and the stages we, part of our introduction, we both were part of a conference, for, the beloved business school of Chicago. And, and so, I show love anyway. I show love. But no, I'm so thankful. But I think this message needs to be heard, because I think usually for some people, that is the introduction to faith. Because if you take the scenario that I talk about already, which is saying there's all these things I want to do, but because of money becomes the worship. I don't have it. Yeah. And so if I don't have it, I can't say these things. I can't do things because there's nothing beyond the physical, tangible. Yeah. Right? It's not the Hebrew scripture. And I think what you're speaking to people, saying that that's so important, because in order for you to do the things that you truly dream about, the things that are unseen, you're going to need to have a muscle, and you're going to need to exercise that muscle, as I appreciate you saying, you give us context, over time. So that when you get faced with those bigger decisions, when you have a lot more to lose later in life, you're all strong enough to say, you know what, I believe. I sense and I believe. From Yale and leaving and having that interaction from, obviously in between with the Verizon manager and the like, where were the other moments where you felt that faith squat had to go real low and go really up, where you were really pressed to say, okay, God, I'm going on this journey. Woo. Okay. Everybody who knows you already understand that breath. And I think you understand that breath. When did you have to exercise your faith muscle beyond what you thought you could lift?
Ooh, man, Lawrence, the reality is I feel like we exercise our faith muscle every single day. We might not think about it in those terms, but the decisions that we make in the morning, and, before we even came on, we talked about our routines, right? Like, what are we doing today? And, that state, that intentionality around where you want to go, you're exercising a bit of faith, because time later in the day is different from time now. And so you kind of have to vision what you can't see yet. So I just want to say, like, faith, I believe, is daily and over time. That's where that muscle builds. And some, though, more poignant moments where my faith, where I had to go really low on the squat. And one big one was when I left JPMorgan after being there 2 years internship and then 6 years being groomed. I had maneuvered and earned a spot as a vice president on my portfolio team in 5.5 years. And I was being groomed to be a kind of lifelong portfolio manager. And I said, I'm going to walk away from this high salary, this high bonus, this high degree of status, and I'm going to go to business school, which in more, people are like going to take on perhaps more debt, and you're already making a lot of money. But that's the thing, right? That the money wasn't fully it. I was being called to do something else. And so when I left there, I felt a lot like Nehemiah. Nehemiah left, right, to, and he was the cupbearer for the king of Susa. And he said to the king, I need to go home to rebuild the wall. And Nehemiah had such a position of power and authority in that kingdom because as the cupbearer, you taste that wine before the king. And so if something's in it, you're going to go down. And so he had that position of authority. That's how I felt at leaving JPMorgan. I had a very, very, very good job. And I was very successful at picking stocks. And to do something different, that tested my faith. And then to build a business that I eventually closed, I'm like, God, I thought you called me to do this business. Like, what's going on right now? I thought I left. And yes, we learned a lot and we were able to turn something out of nothing, but the business failed. And that is real. We did not make enough revenue to cover our expenses. And I made the business decision to close it down. And so my faith muscle was truly built in that moment and over many moments as I also sought therapy and counseling, as I also sought to work with a career coach, as I also went to the war room, went to the mat with God, like, how are we going to use this experience? Because I thought you called me to do this to now move forward. And obviously where I have come out on the other side, because I'm here talking to you today, is one of a testimony about how God did use that experience to give me so many lessons and learnings that I would not be where I am. I would not be talking to you right about this book that I wrote. I would not be a managing partner at Next Street. I would not have the Charisse Says platform that really, I shouldn't have looked at it as a failure on myself. It was a business failure, but I should have looked at it as God's opportunity to open that next season and open that next chapter in my life. And that is was teaching me, because that faith journey then prepared me for the next faith journey. And the one I talk about a lot in the book, or at least dedicate a decent amount of time to, is even having my daughter. And so I'm constantly building that muscle, and it might, just how you do your biceps or do your quads, you might get another side, or you might, use a weight differently to build it in new ways. And so that is what I think God is using us and has used me to be honest, to help someone else also in their own journey.
I think there's so many people who could relate to the jump, of leaving, that doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing this? Right. Especially at this stage of your career. But doing it because you sensed that this was something, and then doing that. And then afterwards saying, like, God, did you call me to fail? Right. I thought the word said, right. And so I think that, I think people that is poignant for people, and even as we kind of close a bit, the thing that pulled me in, what I appreciate so much about your stories is, like, it's a very inclusive tent when you're telling the story. You're very unabashed about your call to build up a part of the body, which is our women, our young girls. At the same time, the stories are universal and they're very inclusive. But one of the stories that I think we're living in a time where redemption is beyond the soul, it's the body. It's the stomach. It's our minds. When we recognize mental health, that there's a physical manifestation of things not being the way God designed it to be. Literally our bodies and the like. And you've had to navigate that, as you talked about just your fertility journey with Gabrielle and you and George going through that. What did you learn differently? What did you learn about God that you did not know at that point? Heading in there, coming and leaving JPMorgan, you already had a sense that, okay, God, all right, I could trust you to leave. I could fail and recognize you're opening up the next door. You're faithful. But what did you learn about God that you did not know already through your journey of fertility with Gabrielle?
Yeah, I so appreciate that. I think I learned two major things that I didn't know, or I didn't know as much as to the depth. And that I could see in my own journey. And I think this is different for everyone, but for me, it was truly around faith defies statistics. And We were told by our doctors that we should stop trying in this particular fertility treatment, which is called IUI. And so intrauterine insemination. And so it's the step right before, most people are familiar with IVF, but it's the step before that. And as part of that process, the doctor told us, well, you guys should just stop trying. This is not working. The chances were, sub 10% at the time, and it's not going to work. And we said, okay. And we said, we'll give it one more time. And it was actually that seventh time, and the number 7, which also we were talking about before this call, we actually were able to conceive and started our pregnancy journey, and then ultimately the birth of Gabrielle. But through that journey as well, we found out that Gabrielle had a heart condition that they said may come to pass when she's actually out of utero. And we had some decisions to make around how we were going to handle that, how we were going to prepare for that. And so faith defying statistics, I had seen it in some other folks' lives, but for my own life, not to the same degree. And that's what I mean, to the degree and to the breadth, that I have to go with what God is telling me to go. And even when the doctor told me differently, and even when sometimes my own mind said, well, why are you keep doing the same thing? They say that's insanity. And so that is what I learned. The second thing is what I learned, to let go of my own timing and expectations. And up until this point, I can honestly say that I like control.
That train is full.
Yes, right? Like, I was still in control with my business, right? I was still in control to a certain degree. But for fertility, it is literally, well, to a certain extent, some things are out of your control. And when the doctor told us earlier in the journey that we were infertile, we were like, what? What is happening here? But that is we don't control that. And so I had thought I was going to be pregnant within a few years after we had gotten married, and we were going to be, on our way to parents. And we found ourselves on this longer journey, on this more, I would say, also faith-fulfilled, loving, centering journey for us, even as married a couple, and the beauty in that for us. But I wanted to control different pieces of that. And so when I finally truly surrendered, okay, God, you say you're all powerful, make it happen. So when I learned to let go of my own timing and expectations around how things should happen and when they should happen, and that was a lesson that I learned through that particular journey with getting Gabrielle here. And as you probably read in the book, her name means strength of God purposefully, because it was through God's strength that she is here. And her middle name is Grace, because God's grace covered us through that process, but ultimately will cover her through her life. And so that affirmed for us the power of God showing up to do what we did not think was possible.
Thank you. No, I thank you so much. And I'm sitting with that with those who are listening and watching, because I think that is two things: the timing and expectations piece, and then the faith defies statistics. I think when people think about even their own story of being the one or the first, I think if they really sit down, they probably see that their life is evidence of that. But you need these reminders, and I thank you, Charisse, for giving us these reminders. Before we go, I have to ask you this though: I think there are prophetic voices for times. I think throughout the scripture, there are voices for times, for occasions. They were sent. Some of them sent knowing there was an L mission, poor Jeremiah, Poor Isaiah. They knew it was an L mission already, right? If they were going to speak these things, they were not going to be the most popular people. But I think there's something about wealth. I think even as a function, I have so many friends who are bankers, traders, and, who are around money. And when I look at the world and just how money is allocated, how we think about where our priorities are, even as a state civically, sometimes I'm just wondering, I'm like, where are the people of God in these things? And so, as God gives you the microphone, I mean, what would you say to these times from a perspective of what are people getting wrong about faith and money, faith and finances, and what's the opportunity that you believe God has given you and given all of us in terms of our relationship with faith and finance?
So, wow. What are people getting wrong and where is their opportunity? I think where people get stuck the most is truly not defining what that wealth means for themselves. Not the standard of that colleague banker, not the standard of your friend, but truly the standard for yourself that God is infusing in you. The Bible tells us that he knew us before we were formed, right? And we also don't have to be anxious about the things that he has prepared for us. And so that is God's power being breathed into us. And so we can define how we want to be wealthy in the totality. Like, we shouldn't put ourselves in a box, and particularly for people of color, why measure ourselves against a standard that didn't even have us in mind in the first place? Why are we even having that standard? This is about kingdom, right? Like, what's God's standard, and what is the standard that actually measures me fully? Wealth defined traditionally kept me out. Why am I going to measure myself by that same standard only? I'm so much more, and God wants me so much more than that. And if we can hold on to that I then am worthy to be that is the wealth that I want you to have. That is the wealth that I want everyone to have. And therein lies the opportunity where we can take not the deficit framework of the standard that didn't have me in mind, but the asset rich framework of the intangible faith that I have, the intangible love and relationships that I have, the intangible joy, and that other tangible stuff. I'm not saying don't get that, because I believe go get that, but not at the expense of the other, because if done well, actually, if you focus on the intangible things, the tangible ones will come, quite frankly. So that trips people out, right? Because you're chasing the dollars, but then you're ending up unhappy, unfulfilled, and trying to figure out, how do I get all of these other things that I want, that peace, that personal power? And so I want to challenge everybody to claim their definition of wealth. I'm offering up what that wealth could be, both on the intangible side and on the tangible side, and honor that for your life, because that is the way God intended us to be.
Woo! And they say, seek the kingdom of God. There's the scripture for those who are listening, those are even curious, and whether you believe in Jesus or just kind of curious about God in general. There's this passage where it says, seek the kingdom of God, and all will be added unto you. And in seeking that kingdom in the fullest sense in your life, in your practices, in every sense, and you fight for your neighbor, for your community. Do I seek for to be for heaven to hit the earth in this area of my life, and all will be added. Charisse, thank you. I can't thank you enough for I would call it iceberg tipping of the story that you shared today, because there's so many more. We are kindred spirits. Even though you are a Yale Bulldog, we still accept you. We're kindred spirits because you are a track lover. So me, along with you and your husband, we are enjoying these times. But I just want to say just thank you, because we need more and more voices sharing this story, but ultimately also giving people tangible steps, complete steps, 7, for them to really truly claim and pursue their wealth. How can people find you? How can people support you? What do you have coming up that people can really rally behind you for?
Absolutely. So appreciate that articulation, Lawrence, of just going out and living the life that God has called you to be and me to be, and those kindred spirits. People can find me, and you can get a free newsletter that I send out every week at www.charissesays.com. That's CHARISSESAYS.com. And there you can also get the book that we have been talking about, and the basis for, or the philosophy that is wrapped into the book that has really led my life. And be that wealthy girl, or have that wealthy girl mindset, because girl is really how you define for yourself, whether you identify as cisgender male or female. It's really about the mindset of claiming wealth for yourself. So you can support me by buying that book and getting those 7 steps, whether that's building an environment for wealth creation, making sure you work your craft, having an investor mindset, running wealthy experiments, starting a business or supporting others, building that faith muscle that we're talking about, or step 7 being, again, a girl as defined by you. And so I am hopeful that you will continue to claim that wealthy girl. And I'm excited. You can get all of where I'm going to be speaking at, or even the recording once we have it, with you, Lawrence, there as well, in that free newsletter. And so feel free to do that and support me there, and don't just keep it to yourself. Share with someone else who can use it. And so I want you to do that too.
Charisse, you are my sister. You are the king's daughter. I thank you. I love you. And I'm grateful for you. And I look forward to many more conversations. God bless you. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
God bless you too, Lawrence. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem.